Hello everyone, my name is Michael Yamana. Back again today with another video for you guys. Today we're going to talk about the CRRT. We're going to talk about what CRRT is, CRRT use and function, and we're going to see how the CRRT machine works. We're going to talk about, we're going to touch a little bit about the function of the kidney as well. And we're going to look into fluid and solvent transport system because I do think this last two are going to be super important in understanding CRRT. Now, by all means, I'm not going to talk about everything you need to know about CRRT in this video, but I will talk about the basics of what you need to know in working with a CRRT machine. So before we go any further, I'm going to talk about a little bit about the kidney and its function because the whole point of the CRRT is replacing the function of our kidneys, okay? CRRT, as it stands for, is a continuous renal replacement therapy, okay? So it's basically replacing the function of our kidneys in case our kidneys do not function as they should because of many reasons. So looking at the kidney, just to kind of brush up on our anatomy topic, the kidney, looking at the cross-sectional view, is made up of cortex, which is outside layer, and then medulla, which is the inner layer, okay? Now, inside the medulla is where you'll find millions of nephrons. Okay, so these nephrons are the functional units of the kidney. Okay, so that's where the most important function of the kidney takes place. Now, the function of the kidney is mainly can be summarized in three. That is fluid regulation, cleaning of our blood, and maintaining our blood pressure. Okay. The way it does this is we have this afferent arteriole where the kidney gets its blood supply, or the blood supply passes through the nephron. So this image here is the nephron and parts of the nephron. So this afferent arteriole kind of folds upon itself and forms glomerulus. Okay. As the blood passes through the glomerulus, it creates high pressure, because it's coming from a wider affluent artery to a smaller efferent arteriole, okay? So whenever you have fluid going from a bigger tube towards a smaller tube, you're generating a high pressure. Now, the reason this pressure is important is it will enable us to transport fluid and electrolytes across a semi-permeable membrane into the Bowman's capsule. Okay, now when the fluid goes through the Bowman's capsule and through the proximal tubule is where more reabsorption of water and electrolytes takes place. So more water will be reabsorbed that are lost. Some important electrolytes such as calcium, sodium, and potassium will get reabsorbed in the proximal tubule. And down it will go through the loop of Henle and all the way out through the distal covulated tubule, which most of our kidneys blood pressure management works. Okay, so this is a general function of the kidney. In this video, I'm more going to be talking about fluid regulation and cleaning of blood, because that's what the CRRT machine does. Also important is to understand the fluid movements in our body. Now, we do have two types of fluid in our system, right? We have fluid that is inside of our cells, and then we have fluids that are outside of our cells. So the fluid inside of our cell, we call it intracellular fluid, okay? Intra mean inside. So that accounts to 40% of our body weight, and the extracellular fluid, which is outside of our cells, counts about 20% of our body weight. That is a pretty significant portion that the fluid accounts for. So looking at the extracellular fluid, again, you have two forms of it. You have the fluid that is inside of your veins, and you have some of the fluids that are outside of your veins. Okay, so the fluid that is outside of your veins we call the interstitial fluid. Okay, the fluid inside of your veins is going to be your plasma. Now, this is what we are going to be discussing about mostly is extracellular fluid, because that's what the kidney and the CRRT machine manages. Not so much the fluid inside of your cells, because the idea is if the fluid outside of your cell is properly managed through fluid movements across the semi-permeable membrane, the fluid inside of your cell will also be properly managed. So that's where the CRRT machine comes in place. Now the fluid transport system across this membrane could be through a passive transport, okay, such as diffusion, when solutes move from a higher concentrated area into a lower concentrated area. And it could be through active transport by the means of ATP or energy, right? One other thing also you have to keep in mind is we're going to talk about ultrafiltration. Ultrafiltration is mostly the transport of fluid across a semi-permeable membrane by means of pressure. Okay, that's one of the means of how the CRRT transport fluids. Okay, the other three are mostly how solutes are transported, and then diffusion we talked about, transport of solutes from higher concentration to a lower concentration. Convention, or we call it solvent drag, is it's almost like a hemofiltration, or takes into account the hemofiltration, and that's when fluid gets transported, it drags with it the solutes. Okay, adabsorption is all the molecules that end up getting attached on the semi-permeable membrane. So keep this points in mind as we move forward in this lecture. So let's talk about renal replacement therapy. It's pretty easy because just as the name implies, what renal replacement therapy is replacing the function of the kidneys. Now, the reason we are replacing the function of the kidneys is because we do not have a properly functioning kidneys because of so many different reasons. Okay, it could be from a kidney disease or many other disease. At some point, the kidney will not function as it is supposed to, and that's when we need to replace it with outside external machine. So it could be intermittent, this renal replacement therapy, or it could be continuous. So when it's continuous, now it becomes a CRRT, right? Continuous renal replacement therapy. And that's the focus of this video. Now, just to let you know, you guys, the intermittent RRT is hemodialysis. That's one of them. And then if you ever heard of the SLID, or sustained low efficiency daily dialysis. So intermittent hemodialysis, it's a more aggressive way of pulling fluids from a patient, and it usually is done within 3 to 4 hours, usually 2 to 4 hours. And within those short period of hours, you get to pull up to 3-4 liters out of the patient. Now that is a pretty aggressive way of treating a fluid imbalance or electrolyte imbalance. But for most of us, for me and for you who's watching this video, that is possible. Most of the hemodialysis patients are able to tolerate that kind of therapy. However, patients that are critically ill, say inside of the intensive care unit, are not going to be able to tolerate such kind of aggressive treatment, which is why the use of a continuous renal replacement therapy on a course of 24 hours or more is necessary. So within the continuous renal replacement therapy, and then we have 4 of them. In this video, we're going to talk about the CVV HDF, or it stands for continuous veno-venous hemodiafiltration, because it covers all the other 3 of it. So that's the basics of continuous renal replacement therapy, is being able to pull out and replace the patient's fluid in a longer period of time, very slowly. Unlike hemodialysis or even the SLADE, or sustained low efficiency daily dialysis, also takes fluids out of the patient slower than hemodialysis, but it is also done within 8 hours. So that still is too much for a patient who is critically ill. So what is the use of CRRT? We just discussed that is to replace the function of the kidneys in situation where the kidney is damaged, just like what you see here in the picture. Now we have acute kidney injury and we have chronic kidney injury. Just know that with the research that has been done recently, 50% of all patients that are in the intensive care unit actually get acute kidney injury. Okay, that is a pretty high number. That's pretty much half of all the patients that are in the intensive care unit. Now you're saying, you might be asking yourself, how come half the patients in the ICU are getting acute kidney injury while they're in the ICU? Well, the thing is, because of 3 reasons. One, as long as the body is concerned, your kidneys are non-essential. Okay, so in the times of great sickness, your body will shunt all the blood towards the 2 essential organs, and those are the brain and the heart. All else is considered non-essential. On top of that, the kidneys need up to 20% of your cardiac output. Okay, 20% is a huge demand for blood. Now, cutting that supply even a little bit is going to have a pretty devastating effect on your kidneys, which is why you get the acute kidney injury inside the ICU. A third reason is rhabdomyolysis. What rhabdomyolysis is a breakdown of your muscles over time when you're not using them. So our body, the way the human body evolved, is our muscles is like if you don't use it, you lose it kind of situation. So not using your muscles when you're sick and lying in bed for a while, you tend to break down your muscles. Now, this breakdown of muscles, all this extra waste has to go somewhere, and that all that waste is getting filtered by the kidneys, and that tends to damage the kidneys as well. So these are your 3 top reasons why patients in the critical care units end up getting acute kidney injury. Also know that critical CRRT is only meant for patients that are over 20 kilograms or roughly 40 pounds of body weight. Now, in this machine, we're going to talk about Prismaflex. That is the machine that is mostly used to carry out the CRRT. Prismaflex does for us a lot of things. It loads and primes the pump, so with blood. It pumps the blood to and from the patient. It delivers anticoagulant solutions while the blood is running through the machine. The need for this anticoagulant is so we do not have any clots in our system, because every time you're moving the blood outside of the body, there's a high risk of getting a blood clot. So this Prismaflex device allows us to inject or insert anticoagulant solutions inside of the blood when it is outside of the body. It monitors the system and alerts. So if there's anything that is out of the ordinary, if there's any kinks or anything like that, the Prismaflex have a good alert system that will let us know of these things. It controls fluid removal rate, so it saves you a lot of times where you do not have to add and subtract the fluid that's going in and out of the patient. The Prismaflex device does a pretty good job in doing those automatically for you. The other is air management. Now you do not want to eject any air into the patient. Now when the blood is going through the tube, there's a good chance some air might sneak into it. So the Prismaflex device has a pretty good system where it detects this extra air, and we'll talk about it more later on in this video, but it will allow us to excrete that extra air before it gets to the patient. So when do we use CRRT? Just like we talked about during kidney injury. But the question now is, how do we know our kidney is injured? How do we know a patient is going through an acute kidney injury? Well, the first and most important thing is decreased urine output. Anytime you have any form of kidney injuries, a decreased urine output is going to be your primary and very important alert that you are going to know. It's a good way, which is why in a lot of hospital, urine is constantly measured by the hour, because any drop out of the usual or out of the norm is a good indication that your kidneys are not properly functioning. Now, a normal urine output is 0.5 ml per kilogram per hour. Okay. So a guy which is 100 kilos, let's say, will have 50 mils of urine out every hour. If it gets to 25 mils per hour, 15 mils per hour, then that should concern you. On top of that, we look at their lab works. So we look at the creatinine, right? So what creatinine is a breakdown of creatinine, which we get from either a muscle breakdown or from a breakdown of the protein that we consume. And our normal level is between 0.5 to 1.5. Now it is normal for men or someone who has just consumed a high protein diet, or someone who works regularly, who works out regularly at the gym. It is normal for those people to have higher than normal creatinine, okay? Which is why we also look at the blood urea nitrogen. So what the BUN means, or blood urea nitrogen, is how much urea nitrogen we have in our blood. So why that is important is our liver tends to break down ammonia, which is a waste product, into urea and nitrogen. So that urea and nitrogen is normally supposed to be excreted out of our body by means of kidney. Now, if our kidney is not properly functioning, we are going to be retaining all that extra urea and nitrogen, which gives us higher than normal BUN levels in our bloodstream. Just to let you know, our normal BUN level is 7 to 20 milligram per deciliters. So anything that is higher than that, in combination with a higher creatinine, in combination with a decreased urine output, should give you a good idea that you're having some form of a kidney injury. Additionally, you may look at the glomerular filtration rate, which will drop down below 60 in case of any kidney injury. So we need to have an access to our body in order to run this CRRT, right? We need to have some form of vascular catheter that needs to get inserted into our vein to take blood from the body and insert the purified blood back to the patient. This vascular catheter is usually inserted in the right intrajugular vein. 9 times out of 10, you will see it inside of the right intrajugular vein, and the tip will rest right above the atrium of the heart. All right, let's take a look at some of the pumps that we have on the CRRT machine. Okay, we'll start looking at the blood pump, which is this big circle here you see in the middle of the CRRT machine. And what the blood pump does is it takes fluids from the patient, run it through the hemofilter. This right here is the hemofilter, and we'll talk about it some more in the next slide. But it runs it through the hemofilter and gives it back to the patient. Next is the replacement pump. So just like the name indicates, replacement pump, we use it to replace any lost fluids back into the bloodstream before it goes to the patient. Your replacement pump can be given pre or post filter. That means that we can give it before the blood goes into the hemofilter, or we can give it after the blood comes out of the hemofilter. Now, the reason this is important is if we replace fluids before the blood gets into the hemofilter, we're going to have hemodilution, okay? The blood is going to be diluted, so therefore, once it gets into the hemofilter, it's not going to be filtered properly, okay? If we filter the blood, or if we wait to replace fluids before or after the blood passes through the hemofilter, then the blood that's going to be going inside the hemofilter is going to be more concentrated. Therefore, it tends to clot more as it goes into the hemofilter, and it tends to reduce the lifespan of the hemofilter. So we have to have a good balance of this pre and post replacement fluids, and both of them are going to be necessary. Your replacement pump is going to be at the bottom right corner of your CRRT device. And then you have your diastolate pump. Your diastolate pump is going to be top left corner of your diastolate of your CRRT device, and simply the diastolate pump is going to deliver the diastolate solution into the fluid compartment of the hemofilter. Again, we'll talk about it a little more in the next slide, what the hemofilter is. And then looking at the blood pump, the pre-blood pump, all that does is deliver replacement solution into the blood access line, that is immediate as the blood immediately comes out of the patient. The pre-blood pump is mostly used for any anticoagulation that is going to be given as the blood runs through the device to avoid any blood clots. Okay. Number 5, we have the effluent pump, which is going to be your bottom left corner here of the CRRT device. And the effluent pump, it automatically controls the rate for us, the fluid removal rate, that is, and it also moves the diastolate solution. And then the syringe pump, which is this syringe right here, also used to inject any anticoagulation medicine as the blood runs through the device. Now, the bags that you see here are going to be color represented, so they're going to be easy to identify. Say, for example, the replacement pump represented by a purple dot or a purple hexagon shape. And then your diastolate pump represented by a green square. And then you have, your diastolate bag. And then your pre-blood bag is going to be a white triangle. And finally, your effluent pump, your effluent bag is going to be a yellow circle. So that will give you an easy way of identifying what bag So let's take a look at this hemofilter device. And it is going to be probably the most important part of the filter or of the CRRT machine. And what it does is it obviously filters waste products by creating a semi-permeable membrane between the diastolate and the blood. So if you take the hemofilter and look at a cross-sectional view of it, so if you cut it in half and look at it from top to bottom, this is what you're going to be looking at. You're going to be looking at this little straws, or what looks like a straws, filled with blood and then surrounded with the diastolate solution. Okay, and within the permeable membrane, so say within the straw, is where the exchange of waste products and electrolytes takes place. By the same way we talked about earlier, so through dilution and hemofiltration. The Prismaflex device for CRRT is going to come with several safety features for patient safety, obviously. So we have the alarm lights, usually at the very top of the device, that tells us if we're good to go or if we are having some kind of a problem. It's a good way of alerting us of what's going on in the CRRT system. The display screen, obviously, it's a touch screen and it displays what's going on. It gives us several information about the patient, how much fluid we're pulling, and all that is going to be displayed on the display screen. Pressure monitors, we have 3 of them, 1 here, 2 and 3 over here, and they are used to identify if there are any kinks in your system. Air bubble detector, obviously super important. This is used to avoid any blood, any air that's going to be going inside of the blood. So it detects any air that's going to go inside the blood. The return line clamp, also called blood patient sensor, is usually clamped right before the blood goes into the patient if there is any error that's happening before. So it's pretty much the last protection that the blood has before it goes to the patient. Okay, so the system clamp itself here, if say there is air in the system, it's not going to be going into the patient because the machine tends to clamp itself. And then we have syringe pump. That's where we put our syringe, where we inject any blood thinners if need be. We have a barcode reader, which enables us to decode barcode that is on the disposable set. You don't see the disposable set here, but it's what is added on top of it, where the blood tends to circulate. It's basically a bunch of tubes that gets put on the CRRT machine. That includes the tubes, the pathway of the blood. We have the blood leak detector, just like the name implies. It detects any leak there is in the system. So it tends to recognize any red blood cells and will let you know if you have leak in your system. Lastly, you have the scales at the very bottom, and that's where we hang the bags we talked about in the previous slide. And this scale is super important because it gives us an accurate measurement of how much fluid the patient's getting and how much fluid we're pulling out of the patient. All right, let's take a look at some of the solutions we use in the CRRT machine. So we have the diastolate solution. We talked about that. So the diastolate solution contains the electrolytes, the buffers, and by the end of the CRRT, our goal is to match the plasma levels of the diastolate solution. Okay. And then we have the replacement solution. Again, we talked about this. This is a solution that gets infused before and after the blood passes through the filter. and it goes directly into the blood and is removed and wholly removed at the end by the effluent pump. And lastly is anticoagulation. Again, that's simply injected or added into the CRRT system to avoid any blood clots. And here we'll look at anticoagulation in more detail. More specifically, citrate is what we use mostly to avoid any blood clots. Now, the way citrate works is it binds with calcium to create calcium citrate, thereby depriving the blood of calcium. Now, why calcium is super important in our blood coagulation system is it tends to build factors, or it changes it turns factors into clotting material. So all the fibrinogens and whatnot that's produced by your liver, it's calcium makes them a usable material. So without calcium, we're not going to have a proper coagulation. So which is good. That's what we want. We want the blood to be thin. We don't want the blood to build any clots. The problem is when we do that, we also have to keep in mind not to pull so much calcium out of the patient, because hypocalcemia, especially severe hypocalcemia, is going to have a more detrimental effect on your patient, which is why calcium is infused separately through an IV on your patient as you're giving the citrate solution. So your citrate solution is going to be put right at the patient as the blood moves out of the patient. Okay, so it's going to be on your pre-blood pump. So we talked about it. So the pre-blood pump pumps the blood when we draw that first initial blood out of the patient. Before it goes anywhere is when your pre-blood pumps place into action, and whatever solution you have in your pre-blood pump gets injected into that blood. So now this happens before the blood gets into the filter. Okay, so once the blood gets into the filter, this extra calcium citrate, so the citrate that's binded with the calcium, gets excreted out by the effluent pump and gets put or gets disposed of in your effluent bag, okay, which is at the very left corner of your CRRT device. Okay, so whatever is left that is being returned to the patient is going to lack in calcium, okay, or free ionized calcium or free calcium ions. Now, your normal ionized calcium is supposed to be between 0.9 and 1.3 mag per deciliters. This is more a conservative and more strict number. Other books might tell you between 0.8 up to 1.5. It's different, but generally we want our ionized calcium to be between 0.9 to 1.3 milligrams per deciliters. The problem is your ionized or your free calcium is not going to be sufficient as the blood is returned to the patient. Okay, so this is why it is very important that you infuse calcium drip through a separate IV to the patient as the patient is on a citrate solution. Now, the moment you take off the citrate solution, you should also cut off your calcium infusion. Otherwise, now you're putting the patient at risk of hypercalcemia. Okay, so that's the basics of the anticoagulation that takes place in your CRRT, if you're using citrate, that is. So last but not least, we'll take a look at alarms and alerts. Again, looking at the safety devices. We talked about the alarm being at the very top of your Prismaflex device, CRRT device. So this alarm is going to have different noises and different colors. So here in the slide, we talk about what these different alarms mean. Okay, what these different
colors indicate. So if you see a green light at the very top of your Prismaflex device, it means all good, everything is working fine, and keep doing what you are doing. Now, if you're looking at a constant yellow light at the very top of your machine, that is just an FYI. That's just the machine giving you information, okay? Nothing you need to take action on. Now, if that yellow light is flashing, it's different. That is more of a caution alarm, not urgent, but you'll definitely need to investigate and take action. And obviously, if you have a red flashing light, that's a warning, and it's usually something pretty serious, and you need to attend to it as fast as possible. So this is a more of a general need to know before you run a CRRT device. Like I said, it's not everything. I will be making another video on this topic eventually, but go ahead, subscribe to my channel if you are interested in these topics, and I'll be putting some more videos in the future. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.